up. The Turin Papyrus has a similar thing of the reign, rule of the Neteru, and the rule by that's called the Shemsuhor, the followers or the followers of the companions of Horus. And again, the names are given and the regnal years, and when you add those all up together, you get around 36,000 BC.
But weren't I'm sorry to interrupt you, but weren't some of the pharaohs, didn't they live hundreds of years?
There's no evidence for that.
But wasn't it written that they did?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what those dates are, actually. I've not actually deeply researched them. I get those figures from Schwaller de Lubix, the great genius with the unpronounceable name, who put together the whole interpretation of symbolist Egypt, from which my work is derived. I mean, I regard myself as Schwaller's Boswell, making his basically impenetrable work accessible to
dummies like me.
No, smart guys like you, not dummies like politicians and academics. No.
So, but when you're talking about 34,000 years, I mean, the average person today lives to be about 80 years. You're talking about an incredible number of pharaohs then.
Yeah, you are. Yes,
but and so all that is depicted?
Apparently the names are given. I get that from Schwaller, from the one long chapter he wrote called the chronology, chorography he calls it, not the word for it, but the chronology of Egypt, where he's looking to back up from a scholarly point of view, from the scholarly argument, that the Egyptians knew what they were talking about when they were assigning these long reigns, that these are not fictitious. This is not made-up history in order to, fool the people who couldn't read the hieroglyphs anyway. Only the scribes could read the hieroglyphs. So Schwaller wrote this very long and thoughtful and scholarly chapter. And then at the very end of it, this throwaway line, and as of course the Great Sphinx of Giza has been weathered, shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion. And that was my little epiphany, because I picked up on that and said, wow, the rest of this isn't science, but that's geology. And if the geologists can be, will agree that this cannot have taken place since 2,500 BC, when the Sphinx is supposedly built, this will upset the whole paradigm. All of civilization will have to be, our view of civilization will have to be rethought. And that's began this long, now 4-decade-long quest to find somebody to back it up. And we're now, my sense of it is, closing in on beating down the opposition. And this will be another thing, actually, in fact, I'll probably be talking about at CPAC, but probably with, how shall I say, a little bit more politely than I feel it necessary to talk about here. I'm here with you. And that is riffing on a line that probably everybody who tunes into this is familiar with. Victor Hugo, the French poet, novelist, a dramatist of the 19th century. France's most popular poet of the 19th century was Victor Hugo. And it was Victor Hugo who wrote the famous line, "There's one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come." You know that line, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that line. But what Victor Hugo didn't think of, or if he did, he didn't express it, was that the second strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time has not yet gone. And since it is a matter of record that all of the armies in the world, be they military, economic, financial, cultural, agricultural even, wherever there's a paradigm, there's an army devoted to protecting that paradigm. And this is where we stand now, that the idea whose time has come only comes when the armies of the second strongest thing in the world are beaten down, are beaten into the ground, and somebody breaches the portcullis to the ivory tower where all of these guys live. And this is a particular interest to me because I am a scholar by default, but a satirist by nature. And really my whole adult life has been devoted to proving a vision that I had at the age of 13 or so, that I was born into a lunatic asylum. And at the age of about 19, it was a very uncomfortable place to live, where everybody called it progress. And I thought it was crazy. And at age about 19 or so, I knew what I wanted to do, which was to be the little boy who said the emperor has no clothes, and to prove to everybody's satisfaction that indeed the emperor has no clothes, and it's a lunatic asylum. The end result took me a couple of decades to realize that. It was that in real life what happens is that, no, the people all done say, whoa, look, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody lives happily ever after. What happens is that the disgraced emperor goes back to his palace and regroups the empire, and at the end all of the forces of empire conspire to prove to everyone that the emperor's clothes are real, but it's the child who's imaginary.
We were talking about this before the podcast, and this is a really fascinating aspect of this discussion. Was when I first became aware of your work was that Charlton Heston narrated documentary about the aging of the Sphinx, the mystery of the Sphinx, which I believe was on NBC. What I thought was shocking was when Dr. Shock was speaking to that Egyptologist who was saying, what evidence is there of a culture that existed 7,000 years before ancient Egypt? There's no evidence. He's like, there is no, and he was laughing. And the way he was doing, there was so much ego involved in what he was saying. I was like, wow, this is not how I would picture an Egyptologist laughing. Well, that got me curious. I started getting into it. Why would anybody think like that? And then I realized, oh, these guys write books and they teach lectures and they teach classes based on this information that they're teaching, and now this information has been shown to be not true anymore. When Dr. Shock was showing this water erosion, he was saying that this was all before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe. And once they discovered Göbekli Tepe, now they know that there is a sophisticated structure capable of massive stone circles that was 12,000 years ago at least, when it was intentionally buried. So it could have easily been several thousand years old then. We don't know. But we know at least 12,000 years ago someone was capable of incredible design and incredible stone structures with three-dimensional animals carved into these stone structures, which is very sophisticated. Now, has that guy been talked to since then, and has he amended his position on it?
As far as I know, he hasn't, and I know Lehner reasonably well. We're civil to each other, and it won't be long now. I mean, he's one of the generals of the in the army of the idea whose time has not yet gone, and his time is coming up pretty shortly.
Does he address Göbekli Tepe now? I mean, because his whole position was there was no civilization. What evidence is there? Well, now that you have this evidence, what does he say? Well, maybe
I haven't actually spoken to him, and I don't know if anyone has. I see him in Egypt every once in a while. I don't know if anyone has, and I ran into him fairly recently. I just said hello, and I don't think I'd necessarily want to bring it up with him off the record. I'd rather have him with the cameras on us,
right,
and just see what happens. But
right.
Otherwise, he's a dead duck.
But it's just so he seems to be just clinging to this idea because he can. Like mainstream academia hasn't accepted